What would you do if you spent your entire life believing your family had your back, only to discover that the one person you trusted most had been quietly stealing everything your mother worked for? Imagine losing your mom. The pain alone is enough to break you. But then imagine sitting in a lawyer's office, waiting to hear her final wishes, and realizing that somehow, someway, everything she owned, her house, her savings, her life's work, had already been signed away. And not to a stranger. To the woman who sat beside you at the funeral, dabbing fake tears with a tissue, whispering, "We'll get through this together, sweetheart." How do you process that kind of betrayal? How do you look someone in the eye who smiled at you while robbing you blind? And more importantly, what do you do about it? Because Claire didn't just sit down and cry. She didn't walk away. She didn't forgive and forget. Claire did something far more dangerous. She started paying attention. Claire Hendricks was 27 years old when her mother died on a quiet Tuesday morning in March. She was the kind of woman people remembered. Not because she was loud or dramatic, actually it was the opposite. Claire had this calm, steady presence that made people feel safe around her. She had warm brown eyes that noticed everything, a soft voice that rarely rose above conversation level, and a habit of listening far more than she spoke. She'd grown up in a modest neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. Her mother, Sandra Hendricks, had raised her mostly alone after Claire's father left when Claire was 9. Sandra worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm for over 20 years. She wasn't rich, but she was careful, disciplined, and deeply intentional about everything she built. Their house on Maplewood Drive wasn't fancy. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and cinnamon. But Sandra had paid it off completely by the time Claire turned 18. She'd also built a modest savings account, just under $200,000, that she'd quietly grown over decades of careful living and smart decisions. "This is for you," Sandra used to tell Claire, squeezing her hand at the kitchen table. "Everything I have is for you. I just want you to have a soft place to land when I'm gone." Claire believed her. Why wouldn't she? Sandra had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's 3 years before she passed. The decline was slow at first. Forgotten keys, repeated questions, confused timelines. Then it became something else entirely. By her final year, Sandra lived in a memory care facility outside Columbus, where Claire visited every single week without fail. Every week. Even when Sandra didn't recognize her anymore. Even when Sandra looked at her own daughter like a kind stranger. That was the hardest part. Sitting across from her mother, holding her hand, and watching the woman who raised her slowly disappear behind her own eyes. Claire never missed a visit. Not once. And through all of it there was Aunt Karen. Karen Whitfield was Sandra's older sister. She was 61, sharp-tongued, and had always carried herself with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. She and Sandra had never been especially close. Karen had married into money in her 40s and had spent the years since acting like that somehow made her better than the sister who'd done everything alone. But when Sandra's diagnosis came, Karen suddenly reappeared. Warm, concerned, present. She started coming to family dinners. She offered to help with Sandra's paperwork. She sat with Claire at doctor's appointments, nodding seriously, asking the right questions. She called Claire sweetheart, and rubbed her back when Claire got overwhelmed. "You shouldn't have to handle this alone," Karen told her once, her voice full of practiced sympathy. "Let me help. That's what family is for." Claire was grateful. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, working a full-time job as a dental office manager while managing her mother's care. Having someone share the weight felt like grace. She trusted Karen completely. That was her first mistake. Sandra passed on a Tuesday. Peacefully, the nurses said. In her sleep, Claire got the call at 6:14 in the morning. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time before she was able to stand up. She didn't cry right away. She just sat there in the gray morning light, staring at her hands, feeling the silence of a world that no longer had her mother in it. Karen was at her door within 2 hours. She brought food, she made calls, she handled the funeral home coordination with brisk, efficient energy. She held Claire while Claire finally cried. She gave a beautiful eulogy at the service, talking about Sandra's strength and grace, her voice cracking at all the right moments. Everyone said how wonderful Karen was. Claire said it too. 2 weeks after the funeral, Claire received a letter from a law firm she didn't recognize, Garrison and Hollis, based in downtown Columbus. The letter informed her that she was named in her mother's estate and requested she come in for a reading of the will. Claire called Karen immediately. "Oh, I already spoke to them," Karen said smoothly. "I've been handling things. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll come with you." Something about the way she said it made Claire pause for just a moment. But she pushed the feeling down. They went together the following Thursday. The conference room at Garrison and Hollis was all dark wood and leather chairs. An older attorney named Gerald Hollis sat across from them, adjusting his glasses as he opened a manila folder. Claire folded her hands in her lap and waited. What she heard next didn't make sense at first. The house on Maplewood Drive, transferred 18 months ago. Sandra's savings account, liquidated and redistributed 14 months ago. The small life insurance policy Sandra had kept for decades. Beneficiary changed 16 months ago. Everything was gone. Everything had been signed over to Karen Whitfield. Claire couldn't breathe. She turned to look at Karen, and Karen was nodding slowly, her expression arranged into something that was supposed to look like regret. "Your mother wanted this," Karen said quietly. "She told me herself. She was worried about the facility costs. She wanted everything managed properly." "She what?" "She was very clear about it, Claire. I have the documents." Gerald Hollis slid the folder across the table. Signatures. Notarized. Sandra Hendricks, authorizing the transfer of all assets to Karen Whitfield. But something was wrong. Claire stared at her mother's signature. She'd seen it thousands of times, on birthday cards, on school forms, on the letter her mother once wrote her when Claire left for college that Claire still kept in her nightstand. This signature was close. Very close. But it wasn't right. Claire didn't say a word in that conference room. She didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't accuse. She simply asked for copies of the documents, thanked Mr. Hollis for his time, and walked to her car. Karen followed her out to the parking lot, her heels clicking on the pavement. "I know this is hard to hear," Karen said. "But your mother was scared, Claire. She was trying to protect the family's assets. This was her decision." Claire looked at her aunt for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Okay." And she drove home. The next 3 weeks Claire barely slept. She wasn't spiraling. She wasn't falling apart. She was working. She pulled out every birthday card, every letter, every document her mother had ever signed. She photographed each one. She researched forensic document examiners. She found a retired one named Howard Bates who now worked as a private consultant and had testified in over 40 forgery cases. She emailed him at midnight on a Wednesday. He responded by 8 a.m. Thursday. They met at his office the following week. Claire spread her materials across his desk, the original documents from the estate alongside every authentic sample of her mother's handwriting she'd been able to collect. Howard studied them for a long time. He used a magnifying glass. He used a light table. He made notes in a small spiral notebook. Then he looked up at her. "The pressure pattern is inconsistent," he said. "Your mother was right-handed, yes?" "Yes. The strokes in these estate documents move left to right with a slight leftward pressure lean. Your mother's authentic samples show a consistent rightward finish. It's subtle, but it's there." He paused. These signatures were not written by the same person. Claire exhaled slowly. "Can you put that in writing?" "I already started." But Howard's report was only the first piece. Claire needed to understand how the notarization had happened. Someone had signed off on those documents as a licensed notary. Someone had been physically present, supposedly verifying Sandra's identity and consent. She filed a public records request for the notary's license information. The name on the documents was a woman named Patricia Cole. Claire searched her name, found her listed at a UPS store location in a suburb of Columbus. She drove out there on a Saturday morning. Patricia Cole was a heavy-set woman in her mid-50s who seemed startled when Claire introduced herself and explained why she was there. I did notarize those documents," Patricia said carefully. The woman who came in with the elderly lady said she had dementia and needed a family member to help. Everything looked in order. "Did my mother speak?" Claire asked. "Did she answer any questions?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. She was very quiet. The other woman, the one with her, did most of the talking. "Did my mother seem like she understood what she was signing?" Another long pause. "Honestly, no. But the woman with her said that was normal for her condition. That she had good days and bad days." Claire placed a photograph on the counter. Sandra and Claire at Christmas, 2 years before the diagnosis. Sandra smiling, sharp-eyed, fully herself. "That's my mother. She raised me alone. She worked for 30 years. She built everything she had from nothing." Patricia looked at the photo for a long time. "What do you need from me?" she said finally. Claire went to an attorney. Not Garrison and Hollis. A different firm. A woman named Rebecca Torres who specialized in elder financial abuse. Claire laid everything out on her desk. The forgery analysis. The notary's statement. The timeline of transfers that aligned almost perfectly with the period when Sandra's cognitive decline had been most severe. The medical records from the facility, which showed that on the specific dates the documents were signed, Sandra had been assessed as having significant cognitive impairment and limited decision-making capacity. Rebecca Torres listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she set down her pen and looked at Claire. "This is elder financial abuse and document fraud," she said. "Potentially criminal fraud." "I know," Claire said. "This could mean criminal charges. Restitution. Full reversal of the transfers." "I know," Claire said again. "Are you prepared for how ugly this gets?" Claire thought about her mother. About every Tuesday visit. About holding Sandra's hand in a room that smelled like antiseptic and artificial flowers, watching her mother stare at the wall. About Karen sitting in that conference room with her expression arranged into grief she never actually felt. "She had nobody to protect her," Claire said quietly. "Except me. And I didn't know." She looked at Rebecca Torres steadily. "I know now." The case moved faster than Karen expected, because Karen had made the mistake that most people who think they've won make. She got comfortable. She'd already listed the Maplewood Drive house with a real estate agent. She'd transferred Sandra's liquidated savings into a joint investment account with her own husband. She'd stopped calling Claire entirely. She thought it was over. It wasn't close to over. Rebecca Torres filed a civil suit for full asset recovery and elder financial abuse. Simultaneously, she referred the criminal evidence, Howard Bates' forgery report, Patricia Cole's statement, the medical records, to the county prosecutor's office. The prosecutor's office opened an investigation. 6 months after Sandra's death, Karen Whitfield was served at her home in the suburb she'd moved to with her husband's money. Claire wasn't there to see it. She didn't need to be. The civil case settled 8 months later. The house was returned to Sandra's estate, and therefore to Claire as the sole legitimate heir. The liquidated savings plus interest and legal fees were ordered to be repaid in full. Karen's husband, who had been kept mostly in the dark and cooperated with investigators once he understood what his wife had done, provided additional documentation that helped accelerate the settlement. The criminal case took longer. Karen hired expensive lawyers. She argued that Sandra had expressed her wishes verbally, and that Karen had simply been helping execute them. She argued that the notary had made a professional judgment call. She tried to make it about a family disagreement over an estate. But the medical records didn't lie. The handwriting analysis didn't lie. And Patricia Cole, who had agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced finding against her notary license, didn't lie either. Karen Whitfield pleaded guilty to one count of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. She was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, ordered to complete 200 hours of community service, and permanently barred from serving as a trustee, executor, or financial representative for any other individual. She never went to prison. That part was hard for Claire to accept, but the judge's statement at sentencing stayed with her. He looked directly at Karen and said, "You took advantage of a woman who could no longer defend herself. You used her condition against her daughter, against every year of work she put into her life. The law has limits in what it can give back. But what you took from this family, the time, the trust, the grief made worse by betrayal, that follows you." Karen didn't respond. She stared at the table. Claire sat in the second row and watched. On a Saturday in October, almost exactly a year after her mother had passed, Claire pulled into the driveway of the house on Maplewood Drive. It had needed some work. A few months of neglect and the uncertainty of the legal process had left it slightly worn. The paint was peeling at the window frames. The backyard had gone a little wild, but it was still there. The address. The old oak tree in the front yard that Sandra had planted the year Claire was born. The faded welcome mat on the porch that said home in cheerful block letters that had almost completely worn away. Claire sat in her car for a while. Then she went inside. It still smelled like the past, somehow like coffee and old wood and something specific and irreplaceable that she couldn't name. She walked through the room slowly. The kitchen where her mother had taught her to cook. The bedroom where Sandra had sat on the edge of Claire's bed when Claire was sick. The small home office where Sandra had kept all her careful bookkeeping records. Every file perfectly labeled. Every receipt in its proper folder. She built this, Claire thought. She built all of it by herself and nobody was going to take it away. Claire sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where Sandra had squeezed her hand and said, "Everything I have is for you." She'd meant it, even when she couldn't say it anymore. Even when the disease had taken the words away. She'd meant every bit of it. Claire stayed at the kitchen table for a long time, in the quiet of that house, in the October afternoon light coming through the window. She didn't cry. She just sat there in her mother's house, in the life her mother had built and fought for and left behind for her. And for the first time since March, she felt like she could breathe. Some people mistake silence for weakness. They see a quiet woman and think she has nothing left to fight with. They forget that the quietest people are often the ones who are paying the most attention. And they are almost always the most dangerous ones to cross.